This is the story of Joe Morris and Bernard Garrett, two African-American business partners who built their own real estate empire in the 50s. They hired a white guy to be the face of their company, while they pretended to be a janitor and a driver. But when they became really successful, they were unexpectedly threatened with being exposed. Today I will tell you about the plot of a movie called The Banker, which is based on real events. In 1939, in Texas, a young man named Bernard Garrett works as a shoe shiner. He listens to conversations with wealthy white people about finances and writes down all the important information in his notebook. Bernard dreams of becoming a banker, even though for black people, practically all paths to wealth are closed. Britton, the boy's father, knows that his son is very smart, but even he doesn't believe that Bernard can achieve anything. After 15 years, Bernard moves to Los Angeles with his wife Eunice and son. Garrett wants to rent out property, but for now, he and his family have to live in a small room that they rent from Eunice's relatives. Bernard notes that neighborhoods for black people are overcrowded, while white neighborhoods have plenty of available homes, and he sees an opportunity to make good money. In a white neighborhood near black neighborhoods, Bernard finds an old house, whose owner could only rent out half of the rooms. He offers the owner $30,000 for the house up front, and another $10,000 in a couple of months, when he rents out all the apartments. The owner wants all the money up front, and refuses. Garrett sees a business card for the Mid-City Bank on Barker's desk and decides to go there. Unfortunately, the secretary doesn't allow the black man to see the manager, and he has to wait several hours outside. When the manager comes out, Bernard asks for a loan to buy the house. This deal would be beneficial for everyone, but the man refused without even listening to the client. In the evening, Barker unexpectedly calls Bernard and agrees to the deal. Seeing Garrett's determination, the building owner realizes that his business idea is likely to work. When Miss Cooper returns home, she angrily makes a comment to the black man who is repairing the neighboring apartment. Bernard says that he is now the owner of the building, and the grandmother is speechless. She calls the police, thinking that the young man is lying, but Garrett immediately presents documents proving his ownership, and the cops leave empty-handed. In the evening, Bernard moves into one of the apartments, which so infuriates the old woman that she moves out the next morning. In just a few days, Garrett finds renters from black neighborhoods for all vacant apartments, and soon gives the remaining money to Barker. The former owner realizes that Bernard is a genius and offers to start a joint business 50-50. Garrett looks for and evaluates houses, while Barker negotiates and signs contracts. The guys make a lot of money over the years, and Bernard buys a luxurious mansion for his family. Unfortunately, Barker dies from a heart attack, and his share in the business goes to his wife. Mrs. Barker doesn't like black people, but she offers to buy Garrett's share for a very low price, because her late husband signed all the contracts, and the court will likely be on her side. Realizing he'll definitely lose the case in court without witnesses, Bernard wants to ask the bank manager, Edward, for help. However, Edward refuses to talk to him and takes Mrs. Barker's side. Then Garrett has a brilliant idea. He goes to Joe Morris, the owner of 18 commercial buildings, and shares his idea to buy the tallest commercial building in downtown Los Angeles, which houses the offices of 12 banks, to gain access to their credit and become a serious player in the real estate market. Joe likes the guy's big ideas, and they start developing a plan. To buy the building, the guys need someone who will be the face of the company, since no one wants to deal with them. Garrett suggests Matt Steiner, a clever guy who helped him repair the building. To negotiate well and buy the bank building at the lowest cost, Matt needs to learn a lot. Joe teaches him golf to make him look like he belongs with the rich people, and Bernard teaches him all the possible ways to determine the value of real estate. They get Matt a fancy suit, teach him good manners, and after a month, Matt can already calculate the value of commercial real estate while playing golf. At a country club, Steiner meets Charles Reno, the owner of a bank building, and they soon begin negotiations. Bernard is preparing Steiner for the deal, knowing that the owner will overvalue the building, so their task is to minimize the cost as much as possible. Matt thinks worse than Bernard, so he spends several days memorizing all the possible price options for the building. His financial savvy shocks Charles and his accountant, and he brings down the building's cost from $2.5 million to $1.5 million. After the deal is made, Matt points out Joe and Bernard as his partners. Bernard and Joe's empire quickly grows, and soon they own over 100 buildings, many of which are located in white neighborhoods. Successful black teachers, lawyers, and workers from other professions move into white neighborhoods. In 1963, Bernard and his family are traveling to Texas to visit relatives and his father Britton, who is very proud of Bernard's accomplishments. The next day, Garrett is walking around town with his son, and they approach the mainland bank, where he used to shine shoes many years ago. A man asks the young shoeshine boy to shine his shoes, but the boy says that the service is only for white people. Realizing the black people are still treated very poorly in Texas, Bernard wants to buy the local bank to help less successful colored citizens succeed. Garrett convinced Joe to buy the mainland bank, even though Joe still believes that it's a very risky venture. Matt agrees to represent their interest again, and they meet with the owners of the bank, Robert Florence Sr. and Jr., to discuss the terms of the deal. Despite his son's displeasure, The father agrees to sell mainland to Matt's company on a condition that Robert Jr. will retain 20% of the bank shares and continue to work as a credit inspector. After buying the bank, Bernard immediately gets to work and gives out dozens of loans to dark-skinned businessmen who previously had no opportunity to get financing and develop their business. However, Florence Jr. is upset because he expected his father to leave mainland to him as inheritance. He soon appears at the Garrett's doorstep and threatens to report the unreliable loans to the Ministry of Finance, which will cause big trouble. So Matt suggests to his partners to buy a smaller bank, Marlin, and transfer all the unreliable loans to it. He also needs to become the sole owner of this bank to avoid drawing attention from regulatory agencies. Joe and Bernard are not completely trusting of Matt, but agree to the deal. Eunice keeps an eye on him working as a janitor in the bank, and Matt finally achieves the independence he has long dreamed of. Florence Jr. sends the Ministry of Finance inspector to Marlin, who checks the bank's documents and finds that the loans bought worth almost $300,000 are problematic and must be sold urgently. Bernard and Joe find out that Florence Jr. and his lawyer gave Matt problematic loans, and now the only way out of the situation is to sell Marlin. But what's even worse is that Matt managed to use the capital of Mainland Bank in a suspicious deal. As a result, representatives of the Ministry of Finance revoke the licenses of both banks and essentially take them away from their owners. As Bernard and Joe leave the bank, they are arrested by the FBI, accused of fraud. A senator meets with Matt and convinces him to testify against Bernard and Joe so that he doesn't end up in jail himself. At the first hearings in court, Matt claims that he is not guilty and that he strictly followed the instructions of his bosses, Bernard and Joe, without realizing that he was breaking the law. After this, the senator invites Bernard and offers him a choice. If he lies and says that he and Joe were just trying to profit from loopholes in the law, then they will stay out of jail. But if he starts talking about racism in the country, he will most likely end up behind bars. At the final hearing, Bernard is not going to lie. He explained that because of discrimination, an entire race in the country is deprived of the opportunity to fulfill their dreams and lead a decent life. However, the jury still sentenced him and Joe to 3 years in prison for misusing bank funds. Almost all of their assets were confiscated. Matt is not charged with anything. 3 years later, Bernard and Joe are released from prison, and Eunice is surprised to see that the two are beaming with happiness, despite the government taking practically everything from them. Garrett reveals that they managed to buy 2 houses in the Bahamas. He also explains that on the eve of his testimony, Matt called him and explained that he would face 50 years in prison if he didn't say what the senator ordered him to say. Garrett forgave Matt, but asked him for a favor until the government confiscated everything from them. Bernard and Joe spent several years enjoying life in the Bahamas before returning to Los Angeles to rebuild their empire.